Warnings about RAAC apparently ignored for years. Housing, hospitals and public buildings all potentially affected, with schools in particular disarray just a day before the start of the new academic year. This morning, the Chancellor tried to reassure England's cash-strapped schools and anxious parents.
We will spend what it takes to sort out this problem as quickly as possible.
So do you commit to covering whatever costs are required to remove all of this dangerous concrete from schools around the country?
We will spend what it takes to make sure that children can go to school safely, yes. And parents should know that. They should also...
But what exactly does spending what it takes actually mean? This video, published just yesterday afternoon to a curiously jaunty soundtrack, offers schools rather more qualified help.
For those settings that are affected, we will provide capital funding for essential work to remove any immediate risks and, where necessary, will provide temporary buildings.
The spectre of empty classrooms once again. Don't leave head teachers in the lurch, urged the Children's Commissioner for England. Do you think that they should fund all the costs associated with maintaining education?
Well, in terms of these children in the 150 schools affected, of course, absolutely. It's not even a money issue I'm concerned about. What we that obviously has to happen. What needs to happen is that proper setups, either in neighbouring schools or in church halls, wherever it is, are made appropriate so that kids can go to school.
And central government should fund that. That shouldn't come down to individual schools.
I think anything that is over and above, so heads will have their budgets, right. But if there are over and above costs, then absolutely, with 2 days' notice, it should be supported.
Labour blame crumbling schools on austerity.
They haven't been investing in our schools estate, and the reason that we're developing all of these problems is because of a consistent failure over the last 13 years. I think there can be no greater a defining image of the last 13 years of the Conservatives' education policy than children sat in classrooms with metal props literally stopping the ceilings from falling in on their heads.
MPs are back in Parliament tomorrow after their summer holidays, and the pressure on the government is ratcheting up. Questions are being asked on all sides of the House. Why did it take them so long to get a handle on the concrete problem? And why has a full list of schools affected still not been published? Mutterings on the Tories' own backbenches are getting louder, and the latest opinion poll shows Labour are still way ahead. And look at Rishi Sunak's personal ratings. An opinion poll published in today's Observer shows those who approve of him in blue stuck way below those who disapprove in pink. A net score of minus 25 percentage points. The concrete crisis is doing nothing to help this government or the Prime Minister.
Well, we asked the Department for Education for an interview with the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, or a minister, but for the third day in a row, we were told no one was available. I did speak earlier to Conservative MP Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown. He's on the Public Accounts Committee, which has been investigating the dangers of aerated concrete. I started off by asking him how many more schools he reckons could be affected.
I think it's difficult to know exactly what the total is likely to be. The department has sent out an extensive questionnaire to all schools. A great deal of surveying has been going on, and there's no doubt about it that RAAC, it will be in a lot more schools. Now, that may mean that part of the school has to be taken out of production. It may mean the whole school has to be taken out of production.
So you say it will be in a lot more schools. So that's going to be a massive worry for parents and teachers in those schools if they're in buildings where this stuff is present and there aren't mitigations in place, and neither the government nor anyone else seems to know about it.
Well, there should have been a response to the survey that the Department for Education sent out to all schools last year. By now, most schools that have got it should have identified it, but I would expect that all school heads and governing bodies will keep their parents up to date with the information that they have.
Parents, teachers, they're in bits worrying about this, and the government hasn't published its own list of which schools are affected. Why not?
The Minister of Schools said of the 104 schools that are affected, the priority was to let parents know when all those parents have been notified, which I imagine would have happened by now. I can't see any reason why a list shouldn't have been publicised.
The Department for Education wanted to urgently survey in detail 600 schools, didn't it? It had done 300 of those by July. Do you know how many more of those urgent, detailed surveys have yet to take place for the presence of RAAC?
I don't, but I do know that the government expects to complete that by the end of the year.
By the end of the year?
Yes.
What's happening now in the meantime?
I mean, every single day, surveys of more and more schools are being done. But it's just a question, with that number of schools, you can't do them all at once.
You've looked at this extensively on the Public Accounts Committee. You're a chartered surveyor yourself. If you had Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, sat in front of you right now, what questions would you be asking her?
What we learned from our 2 public accounts visits to Bury St Edmunds and Huntingdon hospitals is that this thing can be present and not be visible and suddenly become visible because the beam or whatever suddenly moves and snaps, and then you get a result of a collapse. So the number one question is get these schools surveyed as quickly as possible so that we know, so parents know, the head teachers know, everybody else knows whether our AAC is present or isn't.
Is this the consequence of political choices by successive Conservative governments? In other words, austerity, in other words, cutting capital budgets for schools and hospitals?
No, I don't think it's that. I think it's actually that the understanding of this problem has changed. The advice has changed over a course of time. The Chancellor has today announced that there will be enough money to put this problem right. The government have also funded 400 new schools over the next 10 years. But it's not as if the government hasn't been addressing this problem.
If the government had been addressing this problem, why is there a hospital in King's Lynn that's been propped up by 3,000 steel rods?
That hospital is now going to be rebuilt. It's part of the government's new rebuilding programme. It's part of the 9 out of 40 hospitals the government's announced so far.
And you've seen it yourself, haven't you? You've been stood under one of those ceilings that's been propped up.
I have. And what we saw, for example, in the Huntingdon Hospital, is the proper remediation action being taken, albeit with props, I accept that, but it's being constantly surveyed, constantly monitored until the proper new hospital can be built.
And there could be children in schools with these mitigations in place, ceilings being held up by rods and props for years, right?
I suspect that may well be the case, but provided it's been properly assessed and the proper action taken, the risks to health and safety are relatively small. I stress it's where it's not been identified. That's where we should be really concerned at the moment.
So Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, thank you very much for speaking with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kieran.